In Japan, there is a forest at the base of Mount Fuji that locals rarely enter alone. It is quiet, unnaturally quiet. The trees grow so densely that sunlight barely reaches the ground, and the thick volcanic soil absorbs sound so well that even your own footsteps seem to disappear. Compasses often stop working, phones lose signal, and once you walk deep enough into the forest, finding your way out can become nearly impossible. This place is called Aokigahara Forest. Many people know it by another name, the Sea of Trees. But among locals, there's a darker nickname that people rarely say out loud. They call it the forest where people disappear. Tonight's story is about a university student named Kenji Sato, who entered Aokigahara for what he thought would be a simple hiking trip. He never expected that the forest would change the course of his life forever, and what he experienced there still doesn't make sense. In the summer of 2018, Kenji Sato was a 23-year-old photography student from Tokyo. He had recently become interested in landscape photography and had started traveling around Japan during his school breaks. Mount Fuji was at the top of his list, but he wasn't just interested in the mountain. Kenji had heard about the strange forest at its base, Aokigahara. He had read about its history online. The forest was formed centuries ago, when lava from an eruption of Mount Fuji cooled and hardened, creating a rugged landscape full of caves, roots, and uneven ground. Over time, thick trees grew across the hardened lava, creating a dense forest that stretched for miles. Hikers often describe the place as beautiful, but also unsettling. There were warning signs posted near the entrance, signs encouraging visitors to seek help if they were struggling with mental health, signs reminding people that their families cared about them. Kenji had seen photos of those signs online, but he assumed they were simply part of the forest's reputation. Urban legends had grown around Aokigahara for decades. Stories of strange sounds, stories of people losing their sense of direction, stories of hikers walking in circles for hours, unable to find the exit. Kenji didn't believe any of it. To him, the forest was simply a unique place to take photographs. So, on a warm morning in August, he took a bus from Tokyo to the Fuji 5 Lakes region and arrived near the forest entrance around 10 a.m. The weather was clear. Mount Fuji towered above the landscape, and the forest itself looked peaceful. Tall trees, moss-covered ground, soft filtered light passing through the branches. Before entering, Kenji noticed something interesting. Near the trailhead, park rangers had placed colored tape along certain trees. These tapes marked safe routes for hikers, because without them, it was very easy to get lost. Kenji checked his phone. No signal. He shrugged. That was normal for forests. He checked his compass. Working fine. Satisfied, he grabbed his camera and stepped onto the trail. The strange silence. Within minutes of entering Aokigahara, Kenji noticed something strange. The forest was incredibly quiet. Not peaceful quiet, different quiet. Most forests in Japan are full of sounds. Birds, insects, wind through the leaves. But here, almost nothing. The thick trees blocked most of the wind, and the volcanic ground absorbed sound in a way that made everything feel muted. Even Kenji's footsteps on the leaves sounded dull and distant. He walked deeper along the marked trail, taking photos of the twisting tree roots and strange lava formations beneath the moss. The deeper he went, the more unusual the forest felt. The trees grew closer together. The ground became uneven. Large volcanic rocks pushed through the soil in jagged shapes. At one point, Kenji found a small cave formed by old lava tubes. Cold air drifted out of it. His camera flash revealed jagged stone walls disappearing into darkness. He took a few photos and moved on. About an hour later, Kenji realized something. He hadn't seen another person since entering the forest. Not one. That wasn't entirely surprising. Aokigahara is large, and many visitors stay near the main trails. But still, the silence was beginning to feel uncomfortable. Kenji checked his compass again. The needle wobbled slightly before settling. North. Normal. He continued walking. But then he noticed something that made him stop. A thin plastic ribbon tied to a tree branch. It was bright yellow. At first, he thought it was one of the ranger trail markers. But when he looked closer, it was different. The ribbon continued deeper into the forest. One tree, then another, then another. A long trail of yellow ribbons stretching between the trees. Kenji had read about this before. Sometimes hikers tie ribbons or ropes to trees to mark their path so they can find their way back. But usually those ribbons lead toward the exit. These ribbons were leading deeper into the forest. Kenji hesitated. For a moment, he considered turning back, but curiosity won. He followed the ribbon trail. 10 minutes later, he saw something ahead through the trees. A small tent, old, collapsed, covered in leaves, and next to it, a backpack. Kenji approached slowly. The backpack looked like it had been sitting there for a long time. Dust covered the fabric. The zipper was half open. Inside were a few items: a flashlight, a notebook, a bottle of water that had long since dried up. Kenji opened the notebook. Most of the pages were blank, but near the middle, someone had written something in Japanese. The handwriting looked rushed. The message was short. "I thought I knew the way back." Kenji felt a chill run through him. He closed the notebook quickly. Suddenly, the forest didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like something was wrong. Very wrong. Part 3. Losing direction. Kenji decided it was time to leave. He turned around and began walking back toward the main trail. At least, he thought he did. After 15 minutes, something didn't feel right. The terrain looked unfamiliar. The ribbon markers were gone. The trees all looked the same. Kenji checked his compass. The needle spun slowly, then stopped, then moved again. He tapped it. Nothing changed. The compass wasn't working. Kenji frowned. Later, he would learn that the iron in the volcanic rock beneath Aokigahara sometimes interferes with compasses. But at that moment, he didn't know that. He tried to retrace his steps, but every direction looked identical. Tall trees, dark moss, jagged volcanic rock, and silence. The kind of silence that made his ears ring. Kenji pulled out his phone. Still no signal. His breathing became slightly faster. "Okay, relax," he muttered. "Just keep walking." But then, he heard something. A sound. Very faint. Footsteps. Somewhere deeper in the forest. Kenji froze. "Hello?" No response. But the footsteps continued. Slow, careful, crunching softly through leaves. Kenji felt relief at first. Another hiker. Someone who could help him find the trail again. He moved toward the sound. "Hey, over here." The footsteps stopped. Silence returned. Kenji walked forward a few more meters. Then he saw something between the trees. A person. Standing very still, partially hidden behind a tree trunk. Kenji felt relief wash over him. "Hey, I think I'm lost. Do you know where the main trail?" The person didn't respond. They just stood there, completely still. Kenji took another step forward. And that's when he noticed something strange. The person's clothes looked extremely old. Not just dirty. Old. Like hiking gear from decades ago. Kenji frowned. "Excuse me?" The figure slowly turned its head, and Kenji's stomach dropped. The man's face was pale, thin, and his eyes looked empty. Not angry, not confused, just completely hollow, like someone who had been wandering the forest for far too long. Then the man spoke. His voice was dry, almost a whisper. "You shouldn't follow." Kenji stared at the man in confusion. "What do you mean they don't lead people out?" The man didn't answer immediately. He simply looked around the forest slowly, as if listening for something. Then he spoke again. "In Aokigahara, many people who come here don't want to be found." Kenji felt a strange chill. He had heard about the forest's reputation before, but standing here now made the reality feel heavier, more real. The man continued quietly. "Some people tie ribbons so they can find their way back if they change their mind." Kenji slowly looked back at the long trail of yellow ribbons he had followed. "But sometimes," the man said, "they walk too far." Kenji's voice lowered. "And they get lost?" The man nodded. "The forest is bigger than most people think." Kenji glanced around again. Now that he looked more carefully, he noticed something he hadn't seen before. More ribbons, different colors, red, blue, white. Some were old and faded. Others looked newer, thin lines stretching between trees in random directions, like a web, a map of every person who had tried to mark their way, and every person who had never come back to remove them. Kenji felt a heavy knot in his chest. "Have you been out here long?" he asked the man. The man didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned and started walking deeper into the forest. Kenji hesitated. "Wait!" The man stopped. Without turning around, he said quietly, "You should follow the park tape." Kenji blinked. "The ranger markers?" "Yes." Kenji pointed behind him. "I lost the trail." The man finally turned his head slightly. For the first time, Kenji saw a hint of expression in his face. Not anger, not fear, something closer to exhaustion. "You're not the first." Kenji swallowed. "So what do I do?" The man looked up through the trees. The sunlight had shifted. It was later than Kenji thought. "You walk toward the brighter trees," the man said. "The forest grows thicker the deeper you go." Kenji nodded slowly. That actually made sense. The edges of the forest allowed more sunlight through. "Thank you," Kenji said. But before he could ask anything else, the man turned and walked away. Within seconds, the dense trees swallowed him completely. Kenji stood there alone again. But now he had a direction. He looked up at the canopy. Sure enough, one side of the forest looked slightly brighter. He began walking. Part 5. The Way Out. For nearly 40 minutes, Kenji carefully moved toward the lighter side of the forest. The ground slowly became easier to walk on. The trees grew slightly farther apart, and eventually, he saw something that made him sigh with relief. Orange ranger tape. Wrapped around a tree, Kenji hurried toward it. Then another, and another. Within minutes, he was back on an official hiking trail, and just a short distance ahead, he saw people, 2 hikers walking along the path. Kenji almost laughed with relief. He jogged toward them. "Hey," the hikers looked up. "You okay?" one of them asked. Kenji nodded quickly. "Yeah, I just got turned around back there." "That happens a lot here," the hiker said. "You should stay close to the marked trails." Kenji nodded. "I will." The hikers continued on their way. Kenji followed the path for another 20 minutes. Soon he saw the wooden entrance gate to the forest again. The parking area, cars, tourists. Normal life. He stepped out of the forest and took a deep breath. The air felt different, lighter, like a weight had lifted from his chest. Near the entrance stood a small ranger station. A park ranger noticed Kenji and waved him over. "You were in the forest for a while," the ranger said. Kenji nodded. "Yeah, I got lost for a bit." The ranger gave a knowing smile. "Happens more often than people realize." Kenji hesitated. Then he asked something. "Do you ever see people deep in the forest, just standing there?" The ranger's expression changed slightly. "What do you mean?" Kenji explained. The man he had seen, the old hiking clothes, the warning about the ribbons. The ranger listened carefully, then asked a simple question. "Did he have a gray jacket?" Kenji blinked. "Yeah, actually." The ranger slowly exhaled. "That's strange." "Why?" The ranger pointed to a small bulletin board beside the station. Pinned to it were missing person notices, photos, names, dates. Kenji stepped closer, and then he saw the photo. A black and white image of a man wearing a gray hiking jacket, the same tired face, the same thin expression. Kenji's stomach dropped. The ranger read the paper aloud. Takashi Mori, missing since 1987. Kenji's voice came out barely above a whisper. "That's impossible." The ranger shrugged. "People report sightings sometimes." He tapped the paper, but no one has found him. Kenji slowly looked back toward the forest. The trees stood quietly at the edge of the trail, dense, silent, unmoving. And suddenly Kenji understood something unsettling. Aokigahara doesn't just confuse people, it traps them. The thick trees block the wind. The volcanic rock interferes with compasses. Phones lose signal, and every direction looks exactly the same. For someone who walks deep enough into the forest, finding the way back can become impossible. Kenji never returned to Aokigahara again, but he kept the notebook he found in the forest, the one that said, "I thought I knew the way back." Years later, when Kenji tells the story, people often ask him the same question. "Do you think you really saw that missing hiker?" Kenji never gives a clear answer. He simply says one thing: "When I left the forest, I noticed something I didn't see before." The interviewer usually asks, "What?" And Kenji always replies the same way. "There was a gray ribbon tied to one of the trees. A new one." And he pauses before finishing the story, leading deeper into the forest.